In this extension lesson, we're going to take a look at a brilliant short story which, despite being about a murder, is highly entertaining because of the way the plot unfolds. The story is called Lambs to the Slaughter by Roald Dahl. Unfortunately, I can't read all of it to you, but I'll select out certain pieces and then give you some explanations so that you can follow. The story begins like this. The room was warm and clean, the curtains drawn, the 2 table lamps alight, hers and the one by the empty chair opposite. On the sideboard behind her, 2 tall glasses, soda, water, whiskey. Mary Maloney was waiting for her husband to come home from work. This story begins with a description of the room and sets the scene and draws a picture in the reader's mind. You get the feeling that this is an ordinary domestic scene that is played out on a nightly basis. Now, in the section I'm about to read, notice how Dahl builds up his description of Mary Maloney and her relationship with her husband Patrick by describing her actions. For her, this was always a blissful time of day. She knew he didn't want to speak much until his drink was finished, and she, on her side, was content to sit quietly, enjoying his company after the long hours alone in the house. From this brief description, Mary looks like a docile, loving wife whose life revolves around her husband, whom she adores. You get the sense that this is how they spend most evenings. But on this occasion, when the husband returns home from work, he does not treat his pregnant wife the way he usually does. "Tired, darling?" "Yes," he said, "I'm tired." And as he spoke, he did an unusual thing. He lifted his glass and drained it in one swallow. He paused a moment, leaning forward in the chair. Then he got up and went slowly over to fetch himself another. "I'll get it," she cried, jumping up. "Sit down," he said. In this extract, dialogue works really well to develop tension. The short, abrupt comments of the husband contrast with those of the wife, who is trying very hard to be the perfect wife, helpful and caring. The description of the action also helps to indicate that something unpleasant is about to happen. The husband is drinking more than normal, and the reader would wonder why. After more conversation, in which the wife wants to fetch his slippers and make him dinner, and he's again short and rude with her, he explains what is wrong. "This is going to be a bit of a shock to you, I'm afraid," he said, "but I've thought about it a good deal, and I've decided the only thing to do is tell you about it right away. I hope you won't blame me too much." And he told her. It didn't take long, and she sat through it all, watching him with a kind of dazed horror as he went further and further away from her with each word. It's interesting that Dahl does not tell the reader what Patrick Maloney said to his wife, but there are clues to suggest that he is leaving her. Again, dialogue has been used effectively to help us develop empathy with the wife. When the husband is described as going further and further away from her with each word, he is not literally moving away from them, but she figuratively feels him leaving her and the unborn child. As a way of protecting herself from the reality of what has just happened, she carries on as if nothing unusual has happened. And then she announces that instead of going out on a Thursday as they usually do, she is going to make a nice leg of lamb. She goes down to the basement, gets a leg of lamb from the freezer, and then she saw him standing over by the window with his back to her, and she stopped. "For God's sake," he said, hearing her but not turning around, "don't make supper for me, I'm going out." At that point, Mary Maloney simply walked up behind him and without any pause, she swung the big frozen leg of lamb high in the air and brought it down as hard as she could on the back of his head. The husband drops down dead. Now this is where the plot becomes really interesting. In most murder stories, the reader is kept guessing until the end. This plot works differently. We know exactly who committed the crime, why, and how. It is then revealed why and how she covers up the crime. All right, she told herself, so I've killed him. It was extraordinary now how clear her mind became all of a sudden. She began thinking very fast. As the wife of a detective, she knew quite well what the penalty would be. That was fine. It made no difference to her. In fact, it would be a relief. On the other hand, what about the child? Here we see that Mary is worried that she will be sentenced to death, the punishment for murder in Britain. Her complete devotion, however, switches from Patrick to her unborn baby. For her, it would be a relief to die, as she then does not have to live with the pain of losing her husband. But she cannot bear to think of what will happen to the child. It is this love for her child that suddenly spurs her on to quickly think of a way out. She carried the meat into the kitchen, placed it in a pan, turned the oven on high, and shoved it inside. Then she washed her hands and ran upstairs to the bedroom. She tried a smile. It came out rather peculiar. She tried again. The rest of the story is about how Mary Maloney covers up the crime. This is fascinating because we know what happened, but the other characters in the story don't, so we can watch them being misled. We also see Mary change as a character from a devoted and obedient housewife to a cunning murderer. Her first step is to establish an alibi, someone who will say that she was with him or her when the crime was committed. She stands in front of the mirror and practices, and then goes out to the grocer's store. "Hello, Sam," she said brightly, smiling at the man behind the counter. "Patrick's decided he's dead tired and doesn't want to eat out tonight," she told him. "We usually go out on Thursdays, you know, and now he's caught me without any vegetables in the house." "Then how about meat, Mrs. Maloney?" "No, I've got meat, thanks. I've got a nice leg of lamb from the freezer." This seems like an ordinary conversation, but we know it's not. We can even have a smug giggle about her referring to the leg of lamb. It's now time for her to go home and supposedly discover the body and the crime. And when she saw him lying there on the floor with his legs doubled up underneath his body, it was really rather a shock. All the love and longing for him welled up inside her, and she began to cry her heart out. It was easy. No acting was necessary. This part of the plot is included to show that though Mary's actions seem heartless, she genuinely did love Patrick. The fact that she's now acting in such a heartless way is to protect the unborn child, not herself. Still, she must continue with her charade, so she phones the police. After listening to her story about coming home and finding her husband dead on the floor, one of the policemen makes an ironic comment. Her husband, he told her, had been killed by a blow to the back of the head with a heavy, blunt instrument, almost certainly a large piece of metal. "It's the old story," he said. "Get the weapon and you've got the man." This statement is ironic because whilst it may be true, we know what the murder weapon was, and we also know that it is now cooking in the oven, where it is highly unlikely to be discovered as the murder weapon. The police start hunting high and low for a spanner, a vase, anything blunt and heavy that could have been the murder weapon. They get tired and exasperated and eventually hungry. This is where the story reaches its climax. You must be pretty hungry by now, 'cause it's long past your supper time, and I know Patrick would never forgive me, God bless his soul, if I allowed you to remain in this house without offering you decent hospitality. Why don't you eat up that lamb that's in the oven? It'll be cooked just right by now. Now, as disgusting as this is, you're probably smiling by now because you know that this is not just any meal that she's serving up to them. This is the brilliance of this plot, that you know what has happened, so you can watch the other characters get hoodwinked. But the best moment is still to come, when Mary Maloney overhears the policeman discussing the murder weapon from the other room. Whoever done it, they're not going to be carrying a thing like that around with them longer than they need. One of them belched. Personally, I think it's right here on the premises. Probably right under our very noses. What do you think, Jack? And in the other room, Mary Maloney began to giggle. How ironic. The murder weapon is literally under their noses. Mary Maloney has pulled off the perfect crime. She has an alibi, there is no weapon, and not even fingerprints, and no one else knows her husband was leaving her, so there is no motive. I think that Roald Dahl has pulled off a brilliant plot. Although you are not kept guessing, you are kept entertained by watching other people guess. Dialogue, action, and descriptions of characters and settings all contribute to narrative writing. These are all elements that you can use to improve your narrative writing skills. Well, we've come to the end of this lesson. See you next time.